We're in the end game now, and no, you haven't accidentally clicked onto one of our Avengers videos, so please stick around. Despite the fact that pretty much everyone thought that the end of Season 8 of Game of Thrones would have two huge battles in very quick succession in the final two episodes, the showrunners have thrown an almighty spanner into the works. She's called Arya Stark, and she takes no prisoners. The Long Night, as Season 8's third episode has now been titled, was an incredible experience, but it was also an episode that will inevitably have huge consequences and which requires a fair bit of interpretation. So prepare your brains for a deep dive, as I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and this is our breakdown of Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3. Number 11, Ghost is not dead. Let's get this one out of the way immediately. The episode seems to suggest that Ghost's Leroy Jenkins style charge into battle with Ser Jorah and the Dothraki at the start was his end. He didn't noticeably return alongside Jorah and then seemed weirdly absent for the rest of the episode for a character who hadn't just been slain off screen. If it wasn't for the trailer for episode 4 actually showing him, then this point might as well have been dedicated to the creature's memory and his honor, but there is a brief shot of him in Winterfell that confirms he isn't dead. And that means, hopefully, that we might yet see him teaming up with Nymeria for the last war. Fingers crossed anyway. Number 10, Melisandre raised the fiery hand a different way. Melisandre's return was always on the cards, even if her track record for prophecies wasn't exactly stellar up until her departure in Season 7. And while there are questions over just how she managed to walk through the army of the dead or around it peacefully to get to Winterfell, she did play a disposably important part at the start of the battle and a much more important part later on. With the suspicions that she might be bringing the fiery hand, a 1,000-strong army of Red Temple guards, to the fight hanging heavily in the air before the episode aired, it was good to see something in its place, even if that technically didn't come true. Because in place of that army, the fiery hand literally became Melisandre's fiery hand, as she gave the Dothraki flaming weapons that would last for a grand total of about 17 seconds. At least she then made up for it by lighting the trench outside Winterfell, but even that didn't exactly last, and ultimately the episode ended with her wandering out of Winterfell and dying, her purpose apparently served. Number 9, lots of death and the Northern Army is decimated. When the In Memoriam reel plays at the end of this season, it will now include some fairly seasoned characters, some beloved ones and some very important ones, because the Long Night did not shy away from killing. Sure, there probably weren't as many deaths as lots of fans were expecting overall, but the ones they did choose to kill alongside the thousands of red shirts all left a mark. In terms of the goodies, we've now seen the end of my boy Dolorous Ed, Beric, Ser Jorah, Lyanna Mormont, Theon and Melisandre in a bumper episode of deaths. And even beyond the ramifications of their individual deaths, the broad picture for Dany's army is that they've sustained ridiculously heavy losses. Basically, the entire Dothraki were decimated, the Unsullied mostly seem to have fallen as well, though they did defend their position admirably, so they may still have maybe 100 left, and by the time the credits rolled, very few people were left standing. Number 8. But there will be dragons and main characters. Pretty much the only ones left standing after the battle had ended were the principal cast, which was a handy coincidence. Most of them are bloodied and bruised, but they survived to take their battle for the Seven Kingdoms elsewhere now, provided they all still think that they have a dog in the fight, of course. Crucially though, Dany's dragons are still alive, which gives her a serious advantage over Cersei's army. And yes, you heard me right, both of them are still alive as they're shown in the trailer for episode 4, despite it appearing that Rhaegal may have been killed. Cersei is going to have to take them out of the game though, frankly, because they could just rain fire down on Harry Strickland and his golden boys and Dany would win fairly easily. So maybe still expect some dragon-related tension before the story is through. Number 7, was the Night King a Targaryen? There had been hints previously to this effect, but the Night King simply wasn't affected by either normal fire or dragon fire in this episode. That's partly because he was an absolute double-hard bastard who simply ate a face full of dragon breath and then smirked up at Dany as if to say, "Is that all you got?" So how is this possible? Is it merely that the White Walkers are imbued with such powerful magic that they cannot be taken down by fire? Or is it that their bloodline would make such an effect impossible? As Dany says earlier in the show, a Targaryen cannot be killed by fire, so could it be that the Night King was actually a secret relative of Dany and Jon and the third part of the three-headed dragon prophecy? Or is that Targaryen fire thing just a myth that misses the fact that it was actually just Dany who was impervious to the fire? It could be that the show will still throw this in as an added swerve, but it wouldn't at all be surprising if we simply never get an explanation for why the Night King wasn't harmed by the fire. He was a badass after all, even if the one time he did turn up to fight properly, he ended up double dead. Number 6, the dead are gone. In the biggest shock this show has ever pulled, the Night King is dead and the Dead Army are no more, thanks to the unlikely hero of Arya Stark. Having spent so long trying to cast off her own story, the youngest surviving Stark ended up realizing a destiny that most people wouldn't have thought belonged to her, and used the Catspore dagger, a weapon ironically intended to kill Bran so long ago, to kill the Night King. Despite this being only episode 3 of a 6-episode run, the Dead Army are now no more. The Great War is over and Bran's three-eyed raven lives on to preserve the memories of men. It was always going to be this way, but to have it come so early is simply stunning. But whether or not you think it is the right thing to do, or whether you believe that this isn't what George R.R. Martin intended to happen, is firmly up for debate. Number 5. Was Arya the prince that was promised? It definitely appears that this episode is trying to suggest that Arya is indeed the Lord of Light's chosen one. When he dies, Melisandre pointedly says that Beric was brought back for a reason, and having saved Arya from the White who looked certain to kill her, his role was then fulfilled. And then, after feeding Arya the "what do we say to the god of death" line that so famously forms the core of her defiance, Melisandre essentially confirms that she is indeed the prince who was promised. Or she gives Arya the confidence in herself to believe her importance to such an extent that she then goes and does the unthinkable, killing the Night King unexpectedly. It will no doubt infuriate some fans that this cap on her storytelling wasn't quite earned the same way her tryst with Gendry wasn't quite earned either, because we've seen Jon and Dany both being set up as more likely candidates for a long time. And yes, subversion is all well and good, and that's what the show is ultimately known for, but try telling that to the entire fan base and you'll find Arya-like stubbornness from some quarters. Number 4. Now the last war begins. Cersei has been absent for 2 whole episodes now, which was always the right thing to do when the issue of the battle with the Night King was at hand, but now she's about to step back into the limelight. And whether the show cares to say it explicitly or not, what they've done with her by killing the Night King so early is to say, you think that was bad? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet, baby. Baby? Who says baby anymore? There is a lot of story still left to tell in this, the last war, as Dany calls it in the episode 4 trailer, but there has to be some concern that the final fight is a little unmatched given the size of the Golden Company. But this war will be different to the one with the Night King. For a start, it has a far more malicious, devious enemy at the head of it. The Night King was evil and all, but he was kind of one-dimensional and singular in his agenda, whereas Cersei is a snake with 7 heads. It's interesting that we're going to get quite so much focus on this part of the war, a whole half season in fact, but it's not entirely unwelcome, and the added time might actually suggest there's something else coming as well. Number 3, there has to be a sting in this tale. Surely it can't be as simple as this. We can't have 3 episodes of Dany and Jon versus the Night King, and then 3 episodes of Dany and Jon versus Cersei. Yes, there's lots of character work to be done, and lots of conflict to resolve one way or another, but it feels like more than 3 hours of episode runtime is too much for just that. Could it be that we should be expecting some major story deviation before the conclusion then? There's certainly room in the story for that to happen, that's for sure. And you should never put it past Thrones' showrunners to throw in a curveball to further mess with expectations this late in the game. Quite what it might be though is anyone's guess, and this episode proved that trying to predict anything is likely to make you look like Melisandre getting absolutely everything wrong as well, but it's exciting to think of the possibilities ahead of us. Number 2, more space for Jon, Dany, and Dany-Sansa conflict. The last war isn't just about throwing soldiers and dragonfire at the Golden Company and seeing who ends up with someone left to claim the Iron Throne. It's far more subtle and complex than that, which is precisely why it's being given top billing on the Game of Thrones fight card. Because more important than the exhilarating battlefield conflict that we are bound to see is the conflict between Dany and Jon that was seeded when Jon revealed the secret of his heritage in the crypt, as well as Sansa and Dany with the rift for independence. Those 2 conflicts deserve an episode because there is just so much to them, and both are definitely coming. As pretty on the nose reminders, Sansa throws shade at the Dragon Queen to Tyrion and mentions again a conflict, and then even as they ally together on their dragons, Jon and Dany literally crash into each other. So allowing those dynamics to actually breathe without so much battle isn't entirely a bad thing. Number 1, Cleganebowl can happen. Here we all were wondering whether the possibility of Cleganebowl was now done with the story hurtling so quickly towards its conclusion, but the decision to jump in both footed in just 3 episodes means there's way more time to fill now. And because Sandor didn't bite the dust and lives to howl again, the chess pieces have been moved into position to allow this hotly anticipated moment to arrive. As if to foreshadow it, the Hound and Beric share a moment just before the latter dies, in which the Hound seems to have given up before he's given a rallying call. He worries that he can't beat death, which is basically the crux of his battle with the giant zombified remains of his brother. And yeah, while the show might set this up and not pay it off on purpose, it's good to know that the possibility is still there. So that's our breakdown for episode 3. It certainly was a big down, and there was a lot of death, and it was very Game of Thrones. It was certainly surprising, and to be honest, I have no idea where we go from here. But stay tuned next week for another breakdown and another ups and downs and loads more juicy content over on What Culture and Got Culture. And while you're down in the comments, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.